Lila was a student barely making ends meet. With scholarships and late-night shifts at a local diner, she'd learned how to survive. But deep down, she always dreamed of more. A life of comfort. A life that didn't revolve around scraping by. It was during one of her late shifts that fate intervened. The wealthy Miles Hartford, a 71-year-old billionaire with a reputation for his cold heart and charming smile, entered the diner. He was looking for nothing more than a simple meal. Yet something about Lila caught his eye. He saw her determination, the way she served others with genuine kindness. Miles, captivated by her presence, struck up a conversation. His voice was soft, but commanding. He didn't talk down to her like most rich men did. There was an honesty in his words, a magnetic pull that was difficult to ignore. "You work hard for everything, don't you?" he asked, his eyes lingering on her face. Lila nodded shyly, unsure of where this was going. But before long, he was asking for her number. "I don't usually do this," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "But I'd like to see you again." A whirlwind romance followed. Miles seemed to appear in Lila's life at every turn, each encounter more charming and intense than the last. He showered her with lavish gifts, designer clothes, private dinners, weekends away. His attention was overwhelming, yet strangely comforting. But there was something else brewing beneath the surface. Lila began to feel an undeniable connection with him. Then, on a moonlit evening at a private estate, Miles did the unexpected. They were seated at a table set with candles, the gentle music from the pianist filling the air. He stood, his tall figure looming over the table. "Lila, I know this might seem sudden, but I've never met anyone like you. You make everything in my life feel lighter," he said, his voice trembling ever so slightly. Lila blinked, her heart racing. Before she could say anything, Miles knelt in front of her. "Marry me," he said, his eyes filled with a raw intensity. Lila stood frozen. A flood of emotions surged within her: surprise, disbelief, and excitement. Miles, the man she barely knew, was asking her to marry him. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Her mind spun, but her heart whispered that perhaps this was fate. Lila hesitated, but only for a moment. With a heart full of uncertainty and excitement, she said yes. The wedding was extravagant, held in one of Miles's many palatial estates. The media buzzed about the odd pairing of a young student and an older billionaire, but Lila was blissfully unaware of the rumors. Her mind was consumed with the beauty of the day. The flowers, the music, the overwhelming love that surrounded her. Walking down the aisle in a beautiful lace gown, Lila caught sight of Miles waiting for her at the altar, a soft smile on his lips. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, as if she had just found the missing piece of her puzzle. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with vows exchanged that promised devotion. Lila's world changed in an instant. She was no longer a struggling student. She was the wife of a billionaire. After the wedding, Lila found herself in a world far beyond what she had ever imagined. A private jet whisked them away to a secluded island where luxury knew no bounds. The villa was an architectural masterpiece, with sweeping views of the ocean. Lila had never seen anything so beautiful. Miles spoiled her with all the finest things: fresh flowers, gourmet meals, and intimate evenings by the beach. On their first night together, Miles held her close on the balcony as they gazed at the stars. His hand rested on her waist, his touch sending electric shivers down her spine. "This is just the beginning," he whispered. Lila felt the world shift beneath her feet as she allowed herself to fall for him completely. She had never been loved like this before, The honeymoon was everything Lila had ever dreamed of, except for one thing. A nagging feeling started to grow inside her. She couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. One evening, while exploring the villa, Lila stumbled upon a small chest hidden in a study room. Curious, she opened it, only to find letters written in a delicate feminine script. They were all addressed to Miles, each one filled with passionate words of love and longing. Lila's heart sank. There was a truth that Miles had kept from her. He had loved another before. He had given his heart to someone else. The letters made it clear that this wasn't his first love. Perhaps she wasn't the only one who had captured his heart. Lila's mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? Why had Miles kept these letters from her? She waited until they were alone by the beach, the waves crashing softly in the background. "Miles, I found something," she began, her voice trembling. Miles turned to her, his eyes darkening. "What did you find?" he asked, his tone calm but guarded. Lila's heart thudded in her chest as she held up the letters. "Who is she?" she demanded. The shock on Miles's face was unmistakable. He remained silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "It's not what you think," he finally said, his voice soft and measured. He revealed that the letters were from a woman who had been a part of his past, a love lost to time and circumstance. "But none of them compare to you," he added, taking her hands in his. As the days passed, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Miles began to open up about his past, revealing that the woman behind the letters was someone he had loved deeply when he was younger. She had been the love of his life, but fate had torn them apart. "I thought I would never love again," Miles confessed one evening, his voice breaking with emotion. "Then I met you, Lila, and you changed everything." For the first time, Lila saw vulnerability in his eyes. The walls he had so carefully built around himself seemed to crack. As much as she had doubted him, she realized that the man standing before her wasn't the same as the one from the past. He was her husband, someone who was ready to let go of his past to build a future with her. As the days unfolded, Lila's own secret began to weigh heavily on her. She had married Miles, a man whose wealth and age had initially intimidated her, but she had fallen for him, and deeply so. However, there was one truth she had not shared with him, her reason for accepting his proposal. She had known his wealth would change her life, but she had also grown to love him in a way that was beyond his money. One night, as they sat together on the terrace, Lila finally admitted it. "Miles," she began, her voice filled with vulnerability, "I didn't just marry you for your money. I married you because I love you. I didn't know that at first, but I do now." The words hung in the air, and for a moment there was silence. The days following Lila's confession were filled with awkward silence. Despite their earlier moments of connection, something had shifted between them. Miles seemed distracted, his mind constantly preoccupied with something he refused to share. Lila noticed the small signs, the long hours spent in his study, the phone calls he took with a stern expression, the moments when he would gaze out the window, lost in thought. One evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, Lila couldn't take it any longer. "Miles, what's going on? You're not yourself," she asked, her voice trembling. He put down his glass of wine, his gaze avoiding hers. "It's nothing," he replied, but his tone betrayed him. "Just some business matters that need my attention." Lila was no fool. She could see that something was off, and the tension between them only deepened as the days passed. It wasn't just his business. It was them. She couldn't shake the feeling that their marriage, which had seemed so perfect, was beginning to unravel. Miles had always been an enigma, but now his behavior seemed even more mysterious. One evening, when Lila was in the library, she overheard part of a phone conversation that made her heart skip a beat. "I can't keep doing this, Miles," a woman's voice said through the receiver, her words filled with urgency. "You promised me." Lila's blood ran cold. She didn't hear the rest of the conversation, but the words echoed in her mind, fueling the doubts she had kept buried. Could there be someone else in his life? Someone from his past? The same woman from the letters? Had he been leading a double life? Her hands trembled as she returned to their bedroom, her mind racing. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to confront him about everything. But this time, she couldn't hold back. This was the moment where she would uncover the truth. Lila confronted Miles the next morning. He was sitting on the balcony, staring out at the garden, his expression distant. "Miles, I heard your conversation last night," Lila said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Miles turned slowly, his face tight with regret. He didn't speak for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. Finally, he sighed, his voice low. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he admitted. "But there's something you need to understand. The woman you heard on the phone, her name is Isabella. She was someone I loved deeply, a long time ago. And I promised her I would take care of her, even after everything between us ended." Lila's heart felt as though it had shattered in an instant. "So, all this time, you've been helping her? Even while we're married?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miles nodded slowly, his face full of pain. "I never wanted to lie to you, Lila. I never intended for this to come between us. But she's sick, and she's been in need of support. I couldn't turn my back on her." Lila stood frozen, her world crumbling before her eyes. She had thought their love was enough. But now she realized that Miles's heart was still tied to someone from his past, someone who might never let go. After the revelation, Lila didn't know what to do. The trust that had once felt unbreakable between her and Miles was now fractured, and she couldn't ignore the voice in her head telling her to leave. Yet, another part of her wanted to believe him, to understand that this was a complicated situation, one that didn't involve betrayal, but an obligation from his past. For days, they avoided discussing it, but the tension between them grew unbearable. Lila couldn't focus on anything: her studies, the luxuries of their life, or the future she had imagined with him. Her mind was consumed by the doubt gnawing at her, and the love that had once felt so certain now seemed clouded by uncertainty. One night, unable to sleep, she found herself standing on the balcony, staring at the stars. Miles joined her, standing quietly by her side. "I don't know what to do anymore, Miles," she whispered, her voice full of sorrow. "I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if we can move forward." Miles turned to her, his eyes filled with the kind of pain that came from loving someone, but being unable to fully give them what they needed. "I know I've hurt you, Lila, but I swear to you, I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that. I will fix this, for us." But Lila wasn't sure if love was enough anymore. After much soul-searching, Lila finally made a decision. She couldn't live in a world of uncertainty anymore. She loved Miles, but she also needed to love herself. She needed to know that she was more than just an afterthought in his life, a woman who came second to someone from his past. The next morning, she sat Miles down in the sunroom, her heart heavy with the weight of her words. "Miles," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I've thought about everything, and I think I think it's time for me to go. I need space to figure out who I am and what I want. I can't live in this limbo anymore." Miles's face fell, his heart breaking. "Lila, please don't leave. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this together. I love you." Lila shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I love you too, Miles, but I need to find my own way. I need to know that I'm not just a placeholder in your life." Lila left that afternoon, her heart torn in two. The life she had imagined, one of love and happiness, seemed distant now. She rented a small apartment and tried to regain control of her life, but everything felt different. The dreams she had once harbored seemed unreachable without Miles by her side. But as the days passed, she began to find herself again. She focused on her studies, made new friends, and even began to rediscover the passions she had forgotten while immersed in the whirlwind of her marriage. Yet, even with all the changes, Miles's absence left a hole in her heart that she couldn't quite fill. Miles didn't give up. Days turned into weeks, and he continued to reach out to Lila, pouring his heart into his letters and phone calls. He knew he had lost her once, but he wasn't willing to lose her forever. Finally, one rainy afternoon, he stood outside her apartment, holding a bouquet of her favorite flowers. Lila opened the door, surprised to find him standing there. "Miles," she said softly, her heart pounding. "I've missed you," he whispered, his voice full of raw emotion. "I know I made mistakes, but I'm asking for a second chance, Lila. Please." Lila looked at him, her heart a battleground of love and fear. But deep down, she knew that love was never perfect. It was messy and complicated, but it was worth fighting for. And so, she stepped forward, taking his hand. "Let's try again," she whispered. After the confrontation about Isabella, the distance between Lila and Miles only grew. For the first time since their wedding, their connection seemed fractured. Miles, though he had explained the situation as best as he could, remained distant, buried in his work. Lila's thoughts swirled as she tried to make sense of everything. She had once dreamed of this life, a life filled with luxury and love. But now it felt like everything had changed. She looked out the window one late afternoon, watching the sun set over the sprawling estate. The golden hues illuminated the mansion, but it couldn't warm the coldness that had crept between them. She had to admit something to herself. She didn't just want to be the other woman in someone else's past. Her heart, once filled with excitement and joy, now felt uncertain. She didn't want to become a mere shadow of the person he had loved before. She couldn't be second place. As the silence in the mansion grew unbearable, she couldn't stay silent any longer. Miles was at the grand piano in the corner of the room, his fingers absent-mindedly playing soft, melancholic notes. Lila walked towards him slowly, her heart beating faster with every step. "Miles," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He stopped playing and turned, his eyes weary but expectant. "I can't keep living like this," she continued, her voice trembling with vulnerability. "I don't know if I'm enough for you, and I don't know if I can keep living in this space between us. I'm scared, Miles. Scared that I'll never be more than a reminder of what you had before." Miles's gaze softened, and he stood up from the piano bench. "Lila, no one could ever take your place. I never meant to hurt you, but you're not just someone in my life. You're the one I want by my side. I can't change my past, but I can promise you that my future is with you." Lila looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. Could she believe him? Could she trust him again after everything? But as his hand reached out to her, offering both love and understanding, She realized that love was complicated. Maybe their journey was far from perfect, but it was theirs to build together. Days passed in a tense, yet quiet atmosphere. They had spoken little, though both tried to move forward in their own ways. Leela began to retreat into her own thoughts, seeking comfort in solitude. She spent more time with friends, attending university, and rediscovering the passions she had neglected. The love she felt for Miles was still there, but the doubt lingered like an unwelcome shadow. One evening, after another quiet dinner with Miles, Lila went out to the garden, needing air to clear her mind. The moonlight bathed the garden in a silvery glow, and the cool breeze felt like a balm against the heat of her conflicting emotions. She sat on the stone bench beneath a rose arbor, her fingers absently tracing the petals of a flower. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Miles, dressed in a suit as usual, but this time there was no composure in his face. It was raw, desperate. He stepped closer, his eyes filled with a kind of anguish that Lila hadn't seen before. "Lila," he started, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I've made mistakes. I know you're hurt, but you've changed me. I can't go another day without you. I don't want to live in the past anymore. I want you in my future." Lila felt her heart race. The weight of his words settled into her chest. He was so sure of her now, so certain that their future together was all that mattered. Yet, she still held on to her fear, the fear that he couldn't truly love her the way she needed. Could she be enough to replace the love he had lost? She stood, facing him, her heart caught between the desire to run and the pull to stay. "But you've been holding on to her, Miles," she whispered, voice trembling. "I can't be the one you turn to only when you feel like it. I need you to choose me. Fully. I need to know that I'm the one who fills your heart." Miles reached for her, taking her hands into his grip firm. "I've already chosen you, Lila," he said, his voice raw and sincere. "I can't undo my past, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you that you're my future. You're my heart now. I will never let you go." Her heart ached as his words settled over her like a warm embrace. The moment hung suspended, her mind racing with the decision that would forever alter her life. She could walk away and protect herself from the hurt, or she could take a chance on love, trusting that the future they could build together would be worth it. Finally, with a deep breath, she stepped closer to him, her hands resting on his chest. "Then prove it," she whispered, her voice steady with newfound strength. "Show me that I'm not just a placeholder, Miles. Show me that I'm enough." A smile broke through his tension, and he nodded. "I will, Lila. I swear it. You have my heart."